The night was supposed to be quiet, but the silence broke with the sound of angry voices. A girl, barely old enough to understand why people hated her, was dragged through the dust by men who looked at her as if she were a curse. Her hands were tied, her knees scraped the ground, and every step felt heavier than the last. She tried to speak, to beg them to stop, but no one listened. They had already decided what she was, something less than them, something unworthy. They kept calling her the same word over and over. Half-blood, as if it were poison, as if it explained everything they feared. The crowd circled around her like wolves that had finally cornered their prey. Torches burned in their hands, throwing angry shadows across their faces. The heat pressed against her skin before the iron even touched her. She knew what was coming. She had seen them do it before, but knowing didn't make the fear any smaller. When they pushed her down, she tasted dirt on her lips. Someone pressed a knee onto her back to keep her still. She tried to twist away, tried to breathe, but the weight held her in place. Above her the branding iron glowed a deep, cruel orange. It shook in the man's hand, not from mercy but from eagerness. The crowd fell quiet, waiting for the moment they believed would erase her existence. The iron came down. Her scream broke through the night like lightning tearing open the sky. The smell of burning flesh mixed with dust and sweat. Her vision blurred, but she still heard the whispers. Some sounded satisfied, others sounded afraid. None spoke for her. Just beyond the firelight, a figure sat on horseback watching. He wasn't part of the crowd. He wasn't cheering. He wasn't moving. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the girl, studying the way she trembled, the way she fought even without strength. Something about her held him still. He had seen cruelty before, more times than he could count, but something in that moment struck deeper. While the villagers stepped back, proud of what they had carved into her skin, the stranger tightened his grip on the reins. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity: this was not where her story was meant to end. She lay in the dirt long after the crowd drifted away. The pain wasn't only in her burned skin, it ran deeper, into memories she wished she could forget. Long before this night, she had lived between two worlds that never wanted her. She never chose where she came from, yet both sides used her blood as a reason to push her away. She grew up learning that people saw her heritage before they ever saw her face. Her mother used to tell her stories to help her fall asleep. Soft stories, warm stories. Stories about a woman who once lived by the river, a woman who laughed easily, who braided her daughter's hair with such care that the girl always felt loved, no matter how many whispers followed them through the village. Her mother would say, "You are not half of anything, you are whole." But children do not choose what they believe. They believe what the world repeats loudest, and the world around her repeated the same word again and again. Her father's side of the story was different. She never saw him, but sometimes at night, when the wind moved through the trees, her mother looked out toward the mountains with eyes full of memories. "Your father was Apache," she would whisper, as if the name itself might be dangerous. "He loved you before you were born." But love, she learned early, does not protect you when people fear what they do not understand. The village where she lived tolerated her only because her mother worked hard and kept quiet. But tolerance is a thin rope. It can snap at any time. As she grew older, the stares sharpened. People crossed the road when she walked by. Children mimicked the way she looked, making cruel jokes they barely understood. The elders, the ones who should have been wise, treated her as if she carried a shadow that would swallow them whole. She heard them whisper that she wasn't really one of them, that blood like hers brought bad luck, that she would one day turn on them the way they imagined her father had. Her mother shielded her as best she could, but the girl saw what the tension did. She watched her mother's shoulders grow heavier, the smiles grow shorter. She learned to hide her hurt because showing it only fed their cruelty. Some nights when the sky was clear and the moon bright, she dreamed of the mountains, of a place where she wouldn't need to explain who she was. But dreams were fragile. Reality was sharp. When her mother fell sick, everything changed quickly. The illness came like winter frost, silent at first, then relentless. The girl tried everything, gathering herbs, boiling roots, praying in the quiet hours of dawn, but nothing helped. Her mother's strength slipped away day by day. On her final night, the woman cupped her daughter's face with trembling hands. "You are enough," she whispered. "Never let them name you." Then her breath faded, leaving behind a silence that swallowed the entire world. After that, the girl stood alone. The village did not soften. Instead, they tightened around her like a trap closing. Without her mother, she became an easy target. Every wrong thing that happened, crops dying, storms rolling in, livestock getting sick, they blamed on her. Not because they had proof, not because they cared about truth, but because they needed someone to point at. Someone different enough to fear, yet too young to fight back. She learned to live in shadows. She avoided busy paths and kept to the edges of the settlement. She spoke little, not because she lacked words, but because speaking only seemed to invite trouble. Still, trouble found her. One boy threw stones. Another girl hid her slippers in the river. Adults ignored her unless they wanted to scold her. Even the dogs treated her with suspicion, barking whenever she walked by, as if they sensed the hatred that surrounded her. Some days she wandered farther than she should have, just to breathe air that didn't taste of judgment. She traced the horizon with her eyes, trying to imagine what life looked like beyond that narrow world. Sometimes she imagined meeting her father's people. She wondered if they would recognize her. Would her face remind them of someone they once loved? Or would they see only the part of her that came from the village that rejected her? The older she grew, the more the whispers turned into threats. She heard talk that she didn't belong, that someone should deal with her before she caused real trouble. She stayed alert, always listening. Fear became a quiet companion, sitting beside her with every meal, following her into every dream. Then one afternoon, a conflict broke out near the valley. A clash between settlers and Apache, nothing new, but louder than before. The villagers grew terrified and paranoid. They convinced themselves the Apache would strike the village next. And when people are scared, they look for easy answers. They wanted someone to punish, someone to blame for the fear rising in their own chests. And there she was, the girl who carried two bloodlines in her one small body. They seized her without warning. She didn't even have time to run. They didn't call it revenge. They didn't call it cruelty. They called it purifying their land. They said branding her would show where her loyalties lay. They said it would remind others not to trust her kind. She screamed for help, for mercy, but the people she had lived beside her whole life didn't look at her as a child anymore. They looked at her as a threat they needed to control. As they dragged her toward the fire, she understood something she had tried to ignore for years. She had never belonged to them, not even for a moment. Everything she had done to win acceptance had been wasted breath. And the worst part was that she had believed, deep down, that if she just tried harder, someone would see her worth. But standing there, surrounded by faces filled with fear and hatred, she realized that no amount of trying could change a heart that had already closed itself. And yet, even while the heat of the iron grew near again in her memory, she had no idea that far beyond the circle of torches, someone was watching, someone who would not let this be the last chapter of her story. The air around the settlement still smelled of smoke and fear. Fires burned along the edges of the houses. Left from the earlier attack, everyone was still talking about in panicked whispers. The villagers gathered in clusters, clutching their tools and weapons, convinced that danger lurked just beyond the darkness. They didn't see the girl lying on the ground, barely conscious, her body curled around the fresh wound on her shoulder. Or if they did see her, they turned away. She had already served her purpose as their outlet for fear. Now she was just an afterthought. Far beyond the glow of the torches, a lone Apache warrior guided his horse along the ridge overlooking the settlement. He had followed the trail of the raid earlier, searching for survivors, searching for answers, and searching for the kind of trouble he was trained to face. But as he watched the village from the shadows, he saw something he had not expected. A girl on the ground, her hair tangled, her skin burned, her body trembling in pain. She did not look like a prisoner of war. She looked like someone punished by her own people. He narrowed his eyes, trying to understand. He knew the settlers well, knew their fears, their anger, their desperate attempts to control what they didn't understand. But this was different. This wasn't fear of an outsider. This was cruelty turned inward, directed at a child who clearly had no weapon, no strength, no threat in her. His instincts sharpened. Something about her pulled him forward, unsettling him in a way he wasn't used to. The last light of the fires flickered across her face, revealing streaks of dirt and tears. Even from a distance, he could see her body shaking. She tried to lift herself, but her arms gave out, and she fell again with a weak thud. Her breath was shallow, almost uneven, as if her lungs struggled to remember how to work. Each movement looked like a battle she was losing. He scanned the settlement. The villagers were too focused on repairing fences, closing gates, checking weapons. No one spared a glance toward the suffering child. The warrior's jaw tightened. He had seen grown men in battles receive more compassion from their enemies than this girl received from her own kin. She tried again to push herself up. Her fingers clawed into the dirt. The brand on her shoulder glowed an angry red, the letters swollen, the skin cracked. She winced, bit back a cry, and collapsed once more. For a moment she stayed still, staring at her hands as though trying to figure out why they wouldn't obey her. Something inside her seemed to flicker, hope maybe, or the last drop of strength she still had, but the wind swept it away before it could grow. The warrior knew suffering. He knew what it looked like, what it felt like, what silence accompanied it. But what he saw in that girl's eyes when she lifted her head again was not the fear of death. It was the fear that no one, not one soul, thought she was worth saving. It chilled him more than any winter storm. He nudged his horse forward. The animal stepped quietly, its hooves soft against the dry ground. The warrior kept close to the darkness, avoiding the torchlight that could give him away. He studied the burned letters on her shoulder. He recognized the word instantly. For years, settlers had used it to label anyone with mixed blood. They threw it around like a curse, but branded into a child. That was a cruelty he had never witnessed so openly. Her breath hitched when she heard his horse approach. She tried to sit up again, but only managed to turn her face toward him. Her eyes struggled to focus, wide with fear. She didn't know if he was another villager coming to drag her back, or something worse. Her voice trembled when she finally managed to whisper something. He wasn't sure if it was a plea or a name. Either way, it broke a piece of him he didn't know was still fragile. He dismounted slowly, moving with the quiet grace of someone used to the dangers of the night. His silhouette was tall, strong, but nothing in his posture threatened her. His hands were steady, not reaching for weapons but open, empty, deliberate. He knelt beside her and she flinched instinctively. He paused, giving her a moment to breathe, to understand he wasn't there to harm her. Up close, he could see the full extent of her suffering. The burn was fresh and violent. Her skin was cracked and blistered. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears. Dirt clung to her hair. Her lips were pale. And yet beneath all of that he saw something else, a fierce will to survive, even if she didn't believe she deserved to. He spoke softly, his voice calm like steady water. She didn't understand the words at first, not because of the language, but because she wasn't used to anyone speaking to her without anger. Her breathing slowed a little, though her eyes still darted in fear. He reached out carefully and brushed the dirt away from her cheek. She stiffened but didn't pull away. The warrior could feel the heat radiating from her wound, her skin burning not just from fire but from fever. If he didn't act soon, the infection would spread. He glanced once more toward the village. The people were still distracted, unaware of him or the girl they had left to die. It made his decision easier. He had seen enough of the world to know that sometimes the right thing wasn't the safe thing. Sometimes the right thing required stepping into danger with open eyes. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She gasped at the pain, but she didn't fight him. Maybe she had no strength to resist, or maybe she sensed something in his touch, a steadiness she had never known. Her head fell against his chest, her breath shallow but steady. He rose to his feet, holding her close as if she weighed nothing. The warmth of her fever seeped through his shirt, but he tightened his grip, shielding her from the night air. As he carried her into the darkness, away from the village that had rejected her, the warrior felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose, sharp and unmistakable, pulling him forward with every step. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she had endured before this night. But he knew one thing without doubt: he could not leave her behind. The warrior held the girl carefully as he moved away from the settlement, every step measured and silent. The land stretched wide and dark around them, the night sky heavy with low clouds that muted even the brightest stars. He felt her cold breath against his chest, faint and uneven, as if her body wasn't sure it wanted to keep fighting. Her hair brushed his arm, tangled and damp from sweat and tears. She didn't cling to him or struggle. She simply existed in his hold like a fragile spark trying not to burn out. When he reached a safer distance, he slowed his pace and knelt beside a patch of soft earth beneath a tall juniper tree. The wind rustled the branches overhead, scattering needles that fell like quiet whispers. He eased her down gently, making sure she didn't feel the weight of the ground too harshly. She winced at the movement, her breath catching in her throat, but she didn't cry out. It was the silence of someone who had learned long ago that crying never changed anything. The warrior removed his cloak, a heavy, hand-woven piece of fabric lined with warmth, and draped it over her body. She tensed at first, confused, her eyes widening as if she expected another blow. But when she realized the weight covering her was soft, not sharp, her body trembled in a different way. Not from pain, but from disbelief. The cloak smelled of sage and smoke, of long journeys and open skies. It wrapped around her shoulders, shielding her from the cold night air, from the sight of the scar that still burned across her skin, and from the memories that clung to her like shadows. She pressed her face into the fold of the fabric, and for a brief moment she closed her eyes, as if allowing herself the smallest escape from everything she had known. He watched her closely, not with suspicion but with concern. Her body shook with fever. The brand on her shoulder glowed angry and raw beneath the edge of the cloak. She was exhausted, beaten down by more than just the burn. He could see the weight of years pressing down on her small frame. He recognized that kind of burden. It was the kind carried by those who had been denied kindness for too long. She tried to speak, her voice barely more than a cracked whisper. "Why?" The question broke off before she could finish. She didn't have the strength to ask it fully, but she didn't need to. The warrior understood. Why help her? Why save someone marked, abandoned, and forgotten by the people who should have protected her? He met her gaze, steady and calm, and shook his head gently. "Rest," he murmured, not expecting her to understand every word, but hoping she would recognize the tone. His voice carried warmth and certainty, something she had never heard addressed to her before. He reached into the small pouch tied to his belt and took out a handful of crushed herbs, medicines Apache healers had passed down through generations. She watched his hands move, her eyes cloudy with pain but curious. He mixed the herbs with water from a leather flask, turning them into a paste. The smell was sharp, earthy, unfamiliar to her. When he reached out to touch her shoulder, she flinched instinctively. Her breath hitched, and she looked at him with a silent plea, unsure whether she should trust him or fear him. He paused, letting his hand hover above the wound without touching it yet. Slowly, gently, he lifted the edge of the cloak just enough to see the brand. Her skin was blistered and torn, still angry red, the letters swollen and cruel. The sight made his chest tighten, but his expression stayed calm for her sake. "It will cool the burn," he said softly. Even though she didn't fully understand, she felt the intention in his voice. It was the first time someone had cared whether she hurt or healed. When he applied the paste, she gasped, not from pain but from relief. The cool mixture soothed the fire that had been tearing through her skin. Her body relaxed slightly, the tension easing from her shoulders. For the first time since she had been branded, she felt something other than agony. She felt comfort. He worked slowly, carefully, making sure not to press too hard. Her breathing steadied, growing less ragged. She watched him with wide, searching eyes, trying to understand this strange act of kindness. She had never seen anyone treat her with such care, not even in her dreams. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply watched him, her expression softening piece by piece. The warrior wrapped a clean cloth around her shoulder, tying it gently so it wouldn't rub the wound. The touch was light, almost respectful, as if he were handling something precious. When he finished, he pulled the cloak up again to keep her warm. She shivered but didn't pull away this time. The closeness, the protection, felt strange but safe. Her stomach growled quietly, embarrassed by its own hunger. He reached into his satchel and offered her a piece of dried meat. She stared at it for a long moment before accepting it with trembling fingers. She ate slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if she wasn't careful. Every bite brought a little more life back into her face. The warrior settled beside her, not too close, but close enough that she didn't feel alone. The night wind brushed against them, carrying distant sounds of crickets and the rustle of dry leaves. She looked at him again, eyes filled with confusion, gratitude, and exhaustion all at once. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he had stopped for her, but she did know one thing. The cloak around her shoulders felt like the first piece of safety she had ever known. And as she leaned back against the tree, feeling the warmth seep into her bones, she realized something quietly overwhelming. Someone, at last, had chosen to protect her, and she didn't have to face the night alone. The warrior stayed by her side until her trembling eased. The night slowly stretched into the early hours of dawn, painting faint silver lines across the sky. She slept only in fragments, her breath shallow, her body fighting both the burn and the memories still wrapped around her like chains. Each time she stirred or whimpered, the warrior adjusted the cloak, checking her fever with the back of his hand, making sure she did not slip too far into the darkness. When morning finally rose, soft and pale, she blinked awake, startled by the light filtering through the branches. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Her mind reached for the familiar, the harsh voices, the heat of the branding iron, the smell of the village dirt. But the sound of birds replaced the noise, and the warmth around her was not from fire but from the cloak covering her. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing as the movement tugged at her shoulder. The warrior noticed immediately. He approached with steady steps, kneeling beside her. She watched him closely, her instinct to fear still present but softened now by the memory of his kindness. Her body was weak, but her mind fought to understand why a stranger would carry her away from the place. Even her own people wanted her to die. He handed her a small wooden cup filled with water. She took it with both hands, lifting it with slow caution. The water tasted clean and cool, far different from the muddy streams near the village, and she drank every drop. When she finished, she lowered the cup and looked up at him, unsure how to express what she felt. He didn't ask her anything. Instead, he began preparing their path. The Apache camp was not close, and the journey would not be easy, but he had already made his decision long before she woke. She was no burden. She was someone who deserved a chance, and he would bring her somewhere she could find it. When he offered his hand to help her stand, she hesitated. Her legs felt weak, trembling from days of hunger and fear. But when she placed her hand in his, something steadier moved through her, a quiet, unfamiliar confidence. He pulled her up gently, supporting her weight until she could stand on her own. She let out a shaky breath, surprised at her own endurance. As they walked, the landscape stretched around them in sweeping plains and rugged cliffs. The warrior kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, listening for any signs of danger. The girl noticed how naturally he blended into the land, moving with the calm certainty of someone who belonged to the earth itself. Every step he took was deliberate, respectful. He was not a man who wasted movement or words. She stumbled once when the ground dipped unexpectedly. Before she hit the dirt, his hand caught her elbow, steadying her. She blinked at him, embarrassed by her weakness, but he didn't show judgment. Instead, he nodded toward the horizon as if telling her to focus forward. And so she did. Hours passed before they paused for rest near a stream. The water flowed gently over smooth stones, its sound soft enough to quiet the worry curled in her chest. She watched him kneel beside the water, filling another cup and washing his hands. Then he gestured for her to sit beside him. She lowered herself carefully. The burn on her shoulder throbbed with a dull ache, but compared to the fire she had felt the night before, it was almost bearable. The warrior reached into his pouch again and pulled out more herbal medicine. She recognized the scent now, sharp, cooling, calming. He didn't touch her immediately. Instead, he held out the cloth-wrapped mixture, waiting for her permission. That small pause meant everything. No one had ever asked her before. No one had ever waited for her to agree. After a long breath, she nodded. He unwrapped her shoulder again with steady hands. She turned her face away, unable to look at the cruel letters carved into her skin. But the warrior examined the burn without flinching, not with disgust or pity, but with determination. He applied the fresh paste, and she felt the soothing chill spread through her tender skin. Her body relaxed in response. While he worked, she studied him quietly. His eyes were dark and focused, his movements precise. His hair was tied back, though pieces had loosened in the wind. A necklace made of carved bone rested against his chest, worn from years of travel. Every part of him looked like it carried a story, and she wondered what kind of life he had before finding her on the ground. She wanted to speak, to ask him why he cared, but the words tangled inside her. Instead, she whispered something else, something simple. "Thank you." He paused but didn't look surprised. Instead, he nodded once, a small, respectful gesture, before finishing the bandage. She didn't know if he understood every word she said, but he understood gratitude. And she understood that to him, saving her had not been an accident. When they continued walking, she felt different. Not healed, not whole, but not as alone. The land around them grew wilder as they approached the Apache territory. Birds circled overhead and deer watched from shadows, their ears twitching at every sound. The warrior moved with a familiarity that eased her fear. She realized he wasn't just leading her, he was teaching her, even without speaking. Each time he slowed his pace, she understood she wasn't expected to rush. Each time he offered water before he drank himself, she understood she mattered. Each time he glanced back to make sure she hadn't fallen behind, she understood she was no longer invisible. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the world gold and crimson, she could see faint signs of a distant camp, smoke rising slowly, horses grazing, figures moving with practiced rhythm. The Apache camp, her father's people, a world she had only heard about in her mother's whispered memories. She didn't know if they would accept her. She didn't know if she belonged anywhere. But she felt the warrior's presence beside her, steady and calm, and something deep inside her, something small but strong, believed that maybe, just maybe, she would not be turned away. Not this time. The camp stirred with quiet activity as they approached, though the girl kept her gaze low, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. Smoke rose in thin silver threads from cooking fires. Children played near the horses, their laughter drifting through the air like soft music. Women ground corn or wove baskets, their hands moving with practiced rhythm. Warriors stood at watch posts, alert but calm. Everything felt different from the chaos and suspicion she had always known. The air here carried no fear, only purpose. She hesitated at the edge of the camp, her steps slowing. The weight of the cloak wrapped around her shoulders suddenly felt heavier. This was her father's world, a world she had imagined from stories but never truly believed she would see. Now that she stood so close, uncertainty crept through her like cold water. What if they saw her the same way the villagers had? What if they looked at her and saw nothing but the word burned into her skin? The warrior noticed her trembling. He stopped and turned toward her, studying her face with quiet patience. She couldn't hold his gaze, so she looked down, staring at the dust beneath her feet. Without saying a word, he lifted a hand and lightly touched her shoulder, not the burned one but the other, reassuring her with a simple gesture. His eyes told her what words could not. "You are safe." She took a shaky breath and stepped forward. The first Apache they encountered was a woman with long braided hair, her expression sharp but not unkind. She glanced from the warrior to the girl, her eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed the makeshift bandage, and the way the child leaned subtly toward him, seeking support. The woman spoke to the warrior in a calm tone, asking a question the girl couldn't understand. He answered with a brief explanation, his voice steady. The woman's gaze softened as she listened. Another figure approached, an older man, tall and broad-shouldered, with lines carved deep into his face from years of leadership. His presence carried weight, but not the kind that threatened. He studied the girl for a long moment, not with disdain but with curiosity. His eyes lingered on the cloak wrapped around her, the warrior's cloak. Something passed between the two men, a silent acknowledgement, and the elder nodded. The girl didn't understand their words, but she understood acceptance when she saw it. A small ember of hope glowed quietly inside her. She was led toward a shaded area near one of the larger dwellings. Several women gathered there, their expressions warm and welcoming. One of them knelt beside her and gently took her hand. Another offered her water sweetened with herbs. They didn't ask her who she was or why she had come. They simply offered comfort, treating her not as an intruder but as someone in need. The healer arrived soon after, an elderly woman with wise, knowing eyes. When she approached, the girl's breath caught. This woman carried an air of calm so deep it seemed to settle the wind around her. She motioned for the girl to sit. Her touch was gentle but experienced. With slow, practiced movements, she unwrapped the bandage from the girl's shoulder. The healer studied the wound with a long, thoughtful silence. The girl braced herself for a look of disgust, but none came. Instead, the healer's expression flickered with something else, sadness, perhaps, or recognition. She murmured soft words under her breath, not to scold, but to soothe. Then she cleaned the burn with warm water infused with crushed leaves, whispering to the girl as she worked, even though the girl didn't understand the language. The tone alone was enough to ease the tension in her chest. The warrior stood nearby, watching carefully, ready to step in if she panicked. She didn't. For the first time in her life, she let others tend to her without fear of their judgment. The healer applied a different mixture this time, cool, dark, pungent, and wrapped the wound with clean cloth. The pain dulled, turning from a sharp fire into a manageable ache. When the healer finished, she cupped the girl's face gently and nodded. The message was clear: you will heal. Later, when the girl tried to stand and nearly stumbled, the warrior stepped forward and caught her. His arms were steady, just as they had been the night before. She met his gaze, the question rising again inside her. Why? Why would he care for someone he didn't know? But before she could speak, a small group of children ran past, laughing. One of them slowed when he saw her. Instead of mocking her or stepping back in fear, he smiled shyly and offered her a carved wooden toy shaped like a horse. She stared at it, stunned by the simple kindness. Her fingers closed around it and she felt something unfamiliar bloom quietly in her chest. Belonging, or the beginning of it. Days passed. She ate warm meals cooked over open flames. She slept in a soft bed of woven blankets inside a shelter where the wind could not reach her. She listened to the sound of distant drums, to people speaking languages that felt both foreign and strangely comforting. Though she understood little, she learned by watching. The Apache moved with harmony, every person connected to the land and to each other. The warrior remained close, not hovering but never far. He taught her small things at first: how to hold a bowl without spilling, how to breathe through the pain when her shoulder throbbed, how to understand that safety was not something she had to earn. Later, he showed her how to walk silently over dirt and stone, how to steady her balance, how to stand tall even when she felt small inside. She learned slowly, but she learned. Sometimes she caught him watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable, but she no longer felt scared under his gaze. She felt seen, truly seen for the first time in her life. The burned word on her shoulder no longer felt like a sentence. It was still there, still painful, but it no longer defined her. Not here. Not among people who judged her not by the blood in her veins, but by the strength rising inside her. And though she did not yet know what her future would hold, she knew this. She would not face it alone.